Sausage.
Hello, everyone. This is Attack the Backlog, the podcast where I, Mark Kuznez, tries to make a dent in their backlog one game at a time. This episode is all about Arkham Knight, Batman Arkham Knight, that is, in case there was any confusion. The final game in the Arkhamology, not including Suicide Squad, but including, well, yeah, Batman Arkham Origins and Batman Arkham Origins Blackgate, but not including Gotham Knights, which I did play a little bit of, probably about an hour, thinking I was going to continue this on with Gotham Knights and Suicide Squad, and had a miserable time with Gotham Knights. So, not going to play any more of that. We'll see about Suicide Squad. But this may or may not be the end of my Arkham playthrough of replaying games and playing them for the first time. And Arkham Knight is a new low point. I'm not sure if I would put it below Blackgate, because Blackgate is such a different style of game, whereas the rest of them are all very much so cut from the same cloth. But for me, the Batmobile fundamentally changes and ruins the game. And it does it in a way that I don't think most would agree with or talk about. Every time I heard, oh god, every time I heard people talk about the Batmobile and how it was a negative experience overall, or that it hampered the game, it was in the way it controlled, and I think in the general mission design of missions involving the Batmobile. One of the weird things is that right off the start, one of the first things the game has you do is a bit of Batmobile platforming, which it then rarely, if ever, asks you to do again. It is primarily a tank game with the Batmobile, which is to say that the bulk of the missions you're doing as the Batmobile or in the Batmobile are in tank mode or battle mode, combat mode, whatever they call it, where you're just fighting waves of drone tanks and flying drones, and that's it. And that's fine. I didn't have a problem with those missions outside of them getting longer and longer, having you fight larger and larger waves of enemies. At times, I feel like you fought 60 tanks, and that just drags on and is annoying. It becomes frustrating dealing with all these tanks, even though it feels fine to control and do all that. But for me, why the tank ruins Arkham Knight, and I'll get to story and everything else after this. But the reason why the tank or the Batmobile ruins Arkham Knight is because what it does to the game is change the way it controls. And that, so I think, had I played these games naturally over the course of them releasing, I may have felt differently. Because if I had that time between games, I'd be more inclined to accept changes in controls. And I wouldn't be so used to the way the games used to control. But playing these games, and this is a broken record thing you've heard me throughout this series of Attack the Backlogs and second runs, is playing these back to back to back to back to back has not done the series any favors. Even though I really liked Arkham Origins, despite all of that, there have been a lot of aspects to this whole thing that make it clear that I probably shouldn't do this with series in the future. Because I just think it's a lot. But when you do that, it's pretty weird and off-putting when you've played 3 of these games, excluding Blackgate, because that's this whole other thing. But you've played 3 of these games that all play exactly the same. They might have slight differences in gadgets, and the worlds they take place in are different, but control-wise, they all play exactly the same to then transition to a new game that looks the same and is seemingly the same and controls the same in a lot of ways, but not in every way. It's weird. And why it controls differently is because it has to account for the addition of the Batmobile. So instead of the left bumper bringing up detective mode, that now brings or calls the Batmobile. And that's how you get out of it, how you get into it, how you call it, so on. What that means is now detective mode is mapped to, I believe, up on the D pad. And with that, now the D pad is no longer used for quick access to gadgets. Instead of just being able to press left on the D pad and get your explosive gel, or up on the D pad and get your batarang, or right on the D pad and get your bat claw, and so on and so forth. Now you have to hold down and you'll get a little circular menu of all your gadgets, and you use one of the analog sticks to select it. That added step to selecting gadgets was incredibly annoying to me, and I never got used to it. After the first night of playing it, I thought, okay, this is awkward, this is weird, but hopefully I'll get used to it. That never happened. That never happened. So throughout my entire experience of playing Arkham Knight, I was frustrated with the controls the entire time because it didn't control the way I remembered the other games controlling. And it's such a small thing, but for me, it was the Achilles heel. It is what ruined the experience for me. The Batmobile controlled fine, both in tank mode and regular mode. I thought it felt pretty good. Visually, it looks great when you're driving through the city because it they just I bet if the game took place during a night where it wasn't raining 99% of the time, it probably would look worse. I think the rain, not that it is masking what's an ugly game underneath, but I think the rain does do a lot to add to that atmosphere and visual fidelity. It just makes it look, I don't know, I don't want to say nicer. That doesn't seem right to say rain makes it look nicer, but it looks nicer. But the Batmobile just ruined the game for me, despite the fact that, again, I think the Batmobile on its own, if you just separate all of that and what it does to the game, I didn't hate it. The tank stuff, fine, just more and more tedious as the game goes on. Driving around the city was nice, and what it controls all right. I had to get used to it because there is 2 control schemes. There are 2 control schemes for it. The default, you press the left trigger to go into tank mode, and I'm so used to that, of course, being your brake or reverse or brake and reverse. And instead, X is your brake and brake reverse by default, and left trigger is battle mode. Or you can toggle it off and on with, I think, maybe the right bumper if you want. I did that for a little, and it didn't feel right because the way missions and whatnot play out, or just driving around the city, you might come across a drone. It felt much more natural to just be able to quickly switch between the 2 modes and not toggle them. So I did stick with the default there. Then the rest of the game, story wise, I thought it was okay. But of course, we all know how I feel about the Joker, and this is maybe again, if I space these games out more, I wouldn't get so burnt out on the Joker because I think the way the Joker is handled in this is a way that conceptually sounds really, really cool. And in practice, I think it is kind of cool. But for me, I was so sick of the Joker. I am so sick of the Joker at this point that it drove me crazier than any of the other games. Because now instead of the Joker just being one of the antagonists, the main antagonist, just someone who is cropping up when you're doing story missions, he's just there all the fucking time. If you don't know, the Joker is dead. You see him die, you burn his corpse. The way the game opens up is with you burning his corpse. And instead of him being this tangible person, he is now in your head and he's just fucking there all the time. It just it drove me nuts. I'd walk through a door, there's a Joker to say two fucking stupid things at me. And I'm like, can you leave me alone? And in practice, conceptually, that sounds really interesting and cool. And it's kind of doing its job by driving me fucking crazy. It was driving me crazy. I couldn't take it. I just wanted him to leave me alone. And this game also likes to do occasional jump scares where I grab onto a ledge and I'm climbing up, I'm getting myself up, and then the Joker is there to be like, "Ah," I'm like, fucking stop it. Stop it. I can't. You fucking leave me alone. But outside of that, the whole Arkham Knight thing, I had a good idea who it was before it was revealed because clearly the Arkham Knight knows Batman very well, knows the tech and all that. So there's a very small pool of who the Arkham Knight could be. And then when I looked up the voice actors at one point because I thought the Arkham Knight sounded like Troy Baker, and when I asked, "Is this Troy Baker?" someone I think it was Living Large in the chat said or was very, yeah, I don't maybe the Troy Baker's in the game. I think he's in the game. Instead of just telling me Arkham Knight is Troy Baker, which wouldn't have spoiled anything, he gave me this very answer. So I looked it up and then I saw Troy Baker voices Two-Face, which is he's barely in the game, so it doesn't matter. But he voices Arkham Knight and the Red Hood, Jason Todd. So clearly, same character. So that 100% spoiled me before the actual spoiler. But the story was fine. I guess the team up with Poison Ivy I thought was the most interesting side of the story, and I enjoyed that. I like the fact that it was a genuine team up. They worked together, and at no point did she turn and then you had to fight Ivy as a boss fight. No, they just worked together the entire time. I think Scarecrow was underutilized for what Scarecrow is able to do. There is eventually the point where the toxins are let out into the entire city. And it looks very visually cool to have this. If you get above the gas, you just see this what looks more like sludge just covering the entire city. And it's very it it's freaky looking. It's kind of gross too. But my biggest issue with Scarecrow was that the voice actor, the new voice actor this go around, sounded too much like what I remembered Hugo Strange sounding like in Arkham City. And I found out too, this voice actor is a regular actor. I've seen him plenty of things, most notably Fringe. He was the father in that, and I really liked him on that show. He's absolutely the best part of that show, which is just an okay show. It's an okay here. We're gonna try and do X Files again. But the fact that he sounded so much like what I remembered Hugo Strange sounding like, and regardless of whether that is accurate or not, maybe Hugo Strange doesn't sound anything like what I remember. He just didn't sound like what I wanted or expected out of the character of Scarecrow. But I also just feel like what Scarecrow is great at, like in Arkham Asylum, how they use him. You didn't really get a whole lot of that and him manipulating your mind and playing with you. I wish there was more of that. The rest of the game, though, I don't know, because the Batmobile is such a big part of it. You're doing your tank missions. You're roaming around the various parts of the city, taking down drones to lessen the amount of enemies in a various spot. The biggest and best part of Arkham Knight over the rest of the games is that for the first time, navigating the city feels so good. And I'm not talking about the Batmobile. I'm talking about gliding. Gliding got a huge upgrade in this game where now when you grapple onto something and then you're pulling yourself, double tap the A button and you shoot yourself up in the sky and you can glide for a very long distance. And you do your little thing where you dive and you're moving with the flow of the air, but you can continuously just when you're losing speed, grapple to something else, do that boost and project yourself back in the air and make a lot of ground in a short period of time. Gliding for the first time feels like a genuine and good way of navigating the city quickly, which I loved. I think that is probably the biggest and best upgrade from a gameplay standpoint of Arkham Knight. I would go so far as to say it's the first. If I think I already said that, but it is the first time that gliding has felt good and worthwhile. It's the closest the series has gotten to being on the level of something like Spider-Man, where navigating the city is actually fun to do. So props to that. But combat wise and all that, it's just more of the same. You're doing your sneaking around, doing a lot of punching. I'm trying to remember what the boss fights were, and I can't remember a single boss fight, which is maybe kind of good because I don't think the series has ever been the best at boss fights. I'm only remembering all the times the game would say, "Oh, all right, you gotta protect this. Ivy is getting hurt. Protect her vines from all these drones. So get into a tank mission." But uh, it just didn't quite do it for me. It was a bit of a letdown again because more so than anything, with the introduction of the Batmobile, the controls change and they change in a way that just annoys. It just seems crazy to me that you have this series and all these games that control pretty much exactly the same, and then you change it for the bat. What I think would work instead of tapping the left bumper to call a Batmobile and to get out of it, hold the left bumper to call it and get into it. And the left bumper with a tap still brings up detective vision. And then the D-pad is free to be quick actions for your gadgets. And then just to get out of Batmobile, because you're in the Batmobile, you're not going to use the detective mode. You tap it to get out, but hold it to get in. Hold it to call it. I feel like that is the simplest way to make it control like it used to and not ruin the rest of the thing. But in a game where you are using gadgets and detective mode, detective vision so frequently, it just seems weird to now add an extra step. There's not an extra step with detective mode. It just is something you're using so often, more so than even gadgets, that having to how how does it I guess it is the D-pad still on. I was gonna say, how is it on PlayStation, but without offset sticks? That feels even weirder to have to have done it that. Ugh. It just sucks. And because I played on console, couldn't remap the controls. If I could remap the controls, I would have been able to fix that problem. But that is not something I could do. So, yeah, I think that might be it for Arkham Knight because the main thing for me is just the way the game controls. Story, again, whatever. Looks great, plays well. I mean, plays well. Ignore the fact that I don't like the controls, but I just mean performance and all that. I don't know. I got nothing else to say about it. I'm just burnt out. I'm done with that. Can you tell? I've had enough of Arkham. So for me, ranking wise, we've got Arkham Asylum, Arkham Origins, Arkham City, Arkham Knight. And Blackgate might go above Arkham Knight. I don't know. It feels weird to include it in the mainline 3D ones though. But Arkham Knight is my new low point because of the Batmobile. Even though I like driving the Batmobile around, I like tank mode. I like the way tank mode feels at least. And taking down the drones was fun until it wasn't. That's the real thing with it. It's just I like tank mode. I think it feels good when I'm just perusing, just driving around the city and I come across a group of tanks, taking them down feels real nice. But when I'm taking on 60 of these drones, it gets tedious. It gets very, very tedious. Another thing to end out this episode on, one of the things I hated about this game more than anything else, decent length, story wise. Are there side things? I guess there are. I didn't really deal with any side things. But one of the things I hate that may have been in the other games, I just don't remember it. When you're doing various missions, there is an incredibly annoying repetition of your characters or other characters trying to give you tips or just reminding you to do this thing and it'll be beneficial for you. For instance, when you are defending Ivy's plants from drones and she is attacking them along with you every now and again. She can only do it if you stay within a certain range. And if you go outside of that range, she's like, don't forget, if you go too far away, I can't help you. And I'm like, I fucking get it. Stop saying the same single line over and over and over again like I don't already fucking know. Guess what? If I'm leaving the designated space, it's for a good reason. Either there's too much shit here and I need to recover, or there are enemies that aren't, they're just stuck somewhere and I need to go get them. Whatever the reason, there is one though. Just fucking shut up. Or anytime I'd be doing some mission and Batman would say, "Hey, don't forget, if you do this, this is what it'll be really good for you." I fucking know, all right? Shut up. And I had hints turn off. And it fucking just leave me alone. So, yeah. That's Arkham Knight. Batman Arkham Knight. We'll see if there's an episode for Suicide Squad because we're not yet sure if I will stick with that game, but there definitely will not be one for Gotham Knights. But for now, that'll do it for this here episode of Attack the Backlog. Once again, I am Marcus Nez. Y'all can find me pretty much everywhere at PX Sausage. If you enjoy this here show or any of the stuff I do and what have you, you can support me and my nonsense over at patreon.com/PXS. There you can get access to a monthly Q&A, occasional watch party, a private Discord channel along with some fancy Discord roles, and random drops on the Patreon here or there depending on your tier. Or you could just support me to support me if that is your fancy. That is again patreon.com/PXS. In addition to the Patreon, you can find links to the site, the YouTube, the Discord, the Twitch, and so much more over at pxsausage.com. That is the letter P, the letter X, sausage.com. But that is it. That is all. As always, thank you for watching or listening. I hope you enjoyed this here episode, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. But for now, adios, arrivederci. Batman.
It's go time. Go daddy. It's go time.